Captain Jiwan walked slowly across the metal floor of her ship. The bridge was quiet except for the soft hum of machines working. The UES Phoenix looked like any other human ship from the outside. Nothing special about its gray hull or basic weapons, but Captain Jiwan knew something was different about her vessel. 3 months ago, everything changed. Dr. Minho had been working in his lab under the city of Seoul. He was studying some very old objects that workers found deep in the ground. The objects were strange crystals that seemed to glow with their own light. They were covered in marks that looked like writing, but no one could read them. Dr. Minho spent weeks trying to understand the crystals. He ran every test he could think of. The crystals were older than anything humans had ever found. They were millions of years old, but they seemed to respond when humans came near them. The crystals would get brighter and warmer when people touched them. One night, Dr. Minho was working alone in his lab. He was very tired, but he could not stop thinking about the crystal markings. He drew the symbols over and over, trying to find a pattern. Suddenly, the crystals began to glow very bright. The lab filled with light, and Dr. Minho felt something touch his mind. The crystals were showing him pictures, images of space and stars and huge ships flying between worlds. Dr. Minho saw mathematical formulas that hurt his brain to look at. They showed ways to make energy that should be impossible. The crystals were trying to teach him something very important. Dr. Minho called the government right away. Within hours, scientists and military people filled his lab. Everyone wanted to see the crystals and learn their secrets. The crystals seemed happy to share their knowledge, but only with humans. They would not respond to computer scans or robot tests. The government decided to put the crystals on a special ship. They chose the Phoenix because it was new and had the best computers. Captain Jiwan was picked to command the mission because she was brave and smart. The crystals were installed in a special room in the ship, and Dr. Minho came along to study them. While humans were learning about the crystals, something terrible was happening far away in space. The Vorthak Empire was preparing for war. The Vorthak were a race of tall gray aliens with 6 arms and red eyes. They had been conquering worlds for hundreds of years. Admiral Gorak stood in the command center of his flagship, the Destroyer of Hopes. He looked out at his war fleet through huge windows. 3,000 ships filled the space around him. Each ship was bigger than a human city and armed with weapons that could crack planets in half. The Vorthak had rules about conquest. First, they would demand surrender. If a world refused, they would destroy it completely. No exceptions, no mercy. Admiral Gorak had destroyed 47 worlds this way. He was proud of his record. Earth had been discovered by Vorthak scouts 6 months ago. The scouts reported that humans were a young race with weak technology and small ships. Perfect for conquest or slavery, Admiral Gorak sent the usual surrender demand to Earth: bow down and serve the Empire or be destroyed. The humans had refused. Of course, they refused. Admiral Gorak thought all primitive races refused at first. They thought their homeworld made them brave. They thought their love for each other would protect them. They were always wrong. Admiral Gorak smiled as he gave the order to jump to hyperspace. 3,000 ships disappeared from normal space and began racing toward the small blue planet where humans lived. The journey would take 3 days. When they arrived, Earth would have 1 hour to surrender if they still refused. Admiral Gorak would turn their world into burning rock. On Earth, people were trying not to panic. The government had told everyone about the alien threat. Most people could not believe it was real. Aliens were something from movies, not real life, but the scientists had proof. The big radio telescopes had detected the alien fleet moving toward Earth. President Hayes sat in a meeting room deep under the White House. Military leaders from every country were there. General Park from Korea looked very worried. He had run computer models of the coming battle. The results were always the same. Earth would lose. Earth had 300 ships total. Most of them were designed for exploring space, not fighting wars. The biggest human warship was smaller than the smallest alien scout ship. Human weapons were weak lasers and small missiles. The alien ships had planet-killing guns and shields that could stop nuclear bombs. General Park showed everyone the numbers. The alien fleet had 10 times more ships. Each alien ship was 50 times stronger than any human ship. The math was simple. Earth had no chance of winning a normal battle. Some people suggested hiding or running away, but there was nowhere to go. Earth was humanity's only home. There were small colonies on Mars and the Moon, but they had no defenses either. If Earth fell, the human race would be extinct. Captain Ji-won listened to all this from her ship in space. The Phoenix was part of the defense fleet, but everyone knew it was hopeless. The other captains were already talking about retreating to save some ships for later. But Captain Ji-won kept thinking about the crystals in her ship. Dr. Minho had been working day and night since they got the war news. The crystals were acting strange. They were glowing brighter and showing new symbols. The energy readings were going up every hour. Dr. Minho thought the crystals knew what was coming. Something was building inside the crystals. Dr. Minho could feel it like electricity. In the air, his assistant So-young had started having dreams about flying between stars and fighting in space battles. The crystals were trying to tell them something important, but the message was not clear. Yet Captain Ji-won made a decision that would change everything. She called Dr. Minho to the bridge and asked him a simple question. "Do you think the crystals want to help us fight?" Dr. Minho looked at the readings on his computer and nodded. Yes. The crystals were definitely responding to the threat. The alien fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the solar system. Admiral Gorak looked at his screens and saw the tiny human ships waiting for him. He laughed. The humans had barely 300 vessels against his 3,000. It would not even be a real battle. Admiral Gorak sent a message to Earth. "This is your last chance. Surrender now or watch your world burn." The humans had 1 hour to decide. After that, the Vorthak fleet would attack, and nothing could stop them. Captain Ji-won stood on her bridge looking at the alien ships through her telescope. They were huge and dark and covered with weapons. Each one could destroy a city. The human fleet looked like toys next to them, but the crystals were glowing brighter than ever. Dr. Minho ran onto the bridge with exciting news. The crystals were ready. The energy levels had reached maximum. The strange symbols were now arranged in patterns that looked like star maps and weapon designs. The crystals wanted to be used. The crystals wanted to fight. Captain Ji-won made her choice. She ordered her crew to break formation and fly toward the alien fleet. Earth Command started yelling at her to come back, but she turned off the radio. Her crew of 50 people knew they might die, but they trusted her. They had seen what the crystals could do. The small human ship flew toward 3,000 alien warships. The Phoenix looked tiny and helpless as it approached the massive enemy fleet. But inside the ship, the crystals were singing with power, and ancient knowledge was waking up after millions of years of sleep. Dr. Minho ran through the halls of the Phoenix as the ship flew toward the alien fleet. His heart was beating fast and his hands were shaking. The crystals in his lab were doing something he had never seen before. They were changing color from blue to white to gold and back again. The light was so bright it hurt to look at directly. His assistant So-young was standing by the crystal chamber with special dark glasses on. Her computer screens were showing numbers that made no sense. The energy coming from the crystals was higher than anything they had ever measured. It was like having a small star inside their ship. Dr. Minho had spent 3 months studying these ancient objects. He knew they were very old, millions of years older than human civilization. The crystals had been buried deep under Seoul, waiting for someone to find them. But why had they waited so long? What were they waiting for? The crystals were covered in strange writing that looked like no human language. Dr. Minho had tried everything to translate the symbols. He had used computers and asked experts in old languages. Nothing worked, until the crystals started glowing and showing him pictures in his mind. In those visions, Dr. Minho saw a great civilization that lived among the stars long ago. They had huge cities floating in space and ships that could travel faster than light. They were called the Ancients, and they ruled the galaxy with wisdom and kindness. They never forced other races to serve them. Instead, they helped young civilizations grow and learn. But something happened to the Ancients. They grew beyond the need for physical bodies and became beings of pure energy. Before they left the physical world, they hid tools and weapons for future races. To find the crystals were one of those gifts waiting for a worthy species to claim them. Dr. Minho realized the crystals were testing humanity. The objects only responded to humans who showed courage and sacrifice. They had been waiting for a species that would fight to protect others, not just themselves. Earth was facing extinction and the crystals were offering to help, but only if humans proved they deserved such power. So Young called out that something was happening to the ship itself. The Phoenix was starting to change, the metal walls were becoming smoother and the lights were getting brighter. Engineer Taehyun reported from the engine room that their power systems were upgrading themselves. The crystals were not just giving them energy. They were rebuilding the ship, Captain. Jiwon felt the changes as she stood on the bridge. The floor under her feet felt different, more solid and alive somehow. The air itself seemed to sparkle with invisible energy. Her crew looked around in wonder as their familiar ship became something new and strange. The Phoenix had been a normal human cruiser when they left Earth dock. It was armed with basic laser weapons and protected by standard shields. Nothing special compared to the massive alien warships they were flying toward, but now the ship was transforming into something that had never existed before. Navigator. Yoonji watched her screens in amazement. The ship sensors were becoming much more powerful. She could see things in space that should be impossible to detect. The alien fleet was still far away, but she could count every ship and read their weapon systems. The Phoenix was developing abilities that human science could not explain. Communications officer Hyunwoo tried to contact Earth Command, but something strange was happening to their radio systems. Instead of normal human voices, he was hearing whispers in languages that sounded ancient and wise. The crystals were connecting their ship to something vast and old. Dr. Minho understood what was happening. The ancients had left the crystals as a test, and humanity was passing that test. The Phoenix was being transformed into a ship worthy of the ancient legacy. But with great power came great responsibility. The crew would have to choose how to use their new abilities. The crystals showed Dr. Minho more visions of the past. He saw the ancients facing their own moment of choice. They could have used their advanced technology to conquer the galaxy and rule over all other races. Instead, they chose to help and guide younger civilizations. When they evolved beyond physical existence, they left gifts for those who would follow their example. Meanwhile, the Vorthak fleet was getting closer. Admiral Gorak stood on his command bridge looking at sensor readings of the small human ship approaching his armada. His officers were confused. The human vessel was alone and tiny compared to their massive warships. Yet something about it was making their sensors give strange readings. Admiral Gorak had conquered many worlds in his long military career. He had seen desperate enemies try impossible attacks before. Young races always thought courage could beat superior firepower. They were always wrong, but this felt different. The energy readings from the human ship were unlike anything in Vorthak records. The Vorthak were proud warriors who believed that only the strong deserved to survive. They had built their empire by destroying anyone who opposed them. Their ships carried weapons that could break planets, and their shields could stop the explosion of stars. No enemy had ever defeated them in battle, but Admiral Gorak was starting to feel something he had not experienced in centuries. Fear. The human ship was small, but the energy coming from it was massive. More than his flagship, more than his entire fleet combined. What kind of technology did these primitive humans possess? Dr. Minho felt the crystals reaching into his mind more deeply than ever. Before, they were showing him the truth about the galaxy. The ancients had ruled wisely for millions of years, helping countless races develop and grow. But they had also faced enemies like the Vorthak conquerors, who believed in victory through destruction. Crystals contained more than just advanced technology. They held the wisdom of the ancients themselves, the knowledge of how to build perfect societies and how to solve conflicts without war. But they also contained weapons of unimaginable power, for times when peace was not possible. Captain Jiwon felt the ship responding to her thoughts. The Phoenix was no longer just a machine. It was becoming an extension of her will. The ancient technology was bonding with her mind and the minds of her crew. They were becoming something new, a fusion of human courage and ancient wisdom. The transformation was almost complete. The Phoenix now looked nothing like the ship that had left Earth. Its hull was smooth and flowing like liquid metal energy. Patterns danced across its surface in colors that had no names. The ship was beautiful and terrible at the same time. Dr. Minho checked his readings one more time. The crystals had reached full activation. The ancient technology was online and ready. The Phoenix now possessed power that could reshape reality itself. But the real test was still ahead. The crew would have to decide how to use this gift. Would they become conquerors like so many races before them, or would they follow the ancient path of wisdom and protection? The crystals waited patiently for their choice. The fate of not just Earth but the entire galaxy might depend on what happened next. Captain G1 looked out at the alien fleet growing larger in their viewports. 3,000 ships armed with planet-killing weapons waiting to destroy her world, but now she had the power to stop them. The question was how to do it without becoming the very thing they were fighting against. The Phoenix flew forward carrying the hopes of humanity and the wisdom of the ancients toward a confrontation that would echo across the stars. The moment Captain G1 touched the crystal control panel, everything changed. The ship around her began to flow like water. The metal walls stretched and reformed themselves into new shapes. The Phoenix was no longer the small human cruiser that had left Earth. It was becoming something that belonged in legends. Captain G1 felt her mind expanding as the ancient technology connected with her thoughts. She could suddenly see the entire galaxy in her head. Millions of stars and thousands of worlds. Some empty and lifeless. Others filled with civilizations trying to survive in a universe full of dangers like the Vorthak Empire. The crystals were not just powerful objects. They were the memories and wisdom of the ancients preserved in crystal form. Every lesson they had learned, every mistake they had made, every moment of joy and sorrow was stored inside these glowing stones. Now that knowledge was flowing into Captain G1 and her crew. Dr. Minho watched in wonder as his instruments showed impossible readings. The ship was not just changing shape, it was changing the laws of physics around itself. Space and time were bending to the Phoenix will. The ancient technology was rewriting reality to match its needs. Engineer Tai Hyun called out from the engine room that their power systems had multiplied 1,000 times over. The crystals were not just providing energy, they were teaching the ship how to draw power directly from the fabric of space itself. The Phoenix now had more energy than entire star systems. The crew began to understand what had happened to them. They were no longer just humans flying a ship. They had become something new, a perfect fusion of human courage and ancient wisdom. Each crew member could feel the other's thoughts and emotions. They were connected in ways that went beyond normal understanding. So-young gasped as visions filled her mind. She saw the ancients at the height of their power. They had built cities that spanned solar systems and ships that could create new stars. They had the power to reshape galaxies, but they used that power only to help and protect younger races. The ancients had faced a choice that every advanced civilization must face. Use their power to dominate others or use it to lift others up. The ancients chose wisdom over conquest. They became teachers and guardians instead of rulers. That choice had allowed them to evolve beyond physical existence. Now humanity faced the same choice the crystals had, given them godlike power. They could destroy the Vorthak fleet instantly. They could conquer the galaxy and make all other races serve them, or they could follow the ancient path and use their power to protect and guide others. Admiral Gorak stared at his sensor screens in disbelief. The small human ship was now showing energy readings that matched his entire fleet. The vessel had somehow transformed itself from a primitive cruiser into something that defied all known science. His weapons. Officers were reporting system malfunctions as their targeting computers failed to understand what they were looking at. The Vorthak had rules for everything. They knew how to fight ships and planets and even stars, but they had never encountered anything like the Phoenix. The human vessel was operating on principles that their science could not explain. It was as if the laws of physics were different around the transformed ship, Admiral. Gorak had spent 300 years conquering worlds for the Vorthak Empire. He had destroyed civilizations that begged for mercy and enslaved races that tried to surrender. He believed that the universe respected only strength and that the weak deserved whatever happened to them. But looking at the Phoenix Admiral Gorak felt something he had not experienced in centuries. Doubt. What if there were kinds of strength that the Vorthak did not understand? What if their empire was built on lies? What if they were the primitives in this encounter? The Phoenix moved through space with impossible grace. It no longer needed rockets or engines to propel itself. The ship was manipulating space, time itself to travel faster than light should allow. The Vorthak fleet looked slow and clumsy compared to the elegant movements of the transformed human vessel. Captain Jiwan felt the weight of countless civilizations on her shoulders. The ancient memories showed her what had happened to races that chose conquest over wisdom. They became empty and hollow. Their victories turned to ash in their mouths. They ended up destroying themselves from within. The Vorthak were following that same dark path. They had forgotten their original nature as explorers and builders. The endless wars had turned them into machines of destruction. They conquered worlds but gained nothing from their victories except the need to conquer more, through the crystals. Captain Jiwan could see into the hearts of the Vorthak warriors. They were afraid. Afraid of being weak. Afraid of being destroyed, afraid of showing mercy. They thought that cruelty made them strong, but it was actually making them weaker. With each passing year, the Phoenix approached the center of the Vorthak formation. Admiral Gorak ordered 50 of his best ships to surround the human vessel. He still could not believe that one small ship could threaten his mighty armada. But his sensors were telling him impossible things about the Phoenix capabilities. Dr. Minho felt the ancient consciousness flowing through him like warm light. The crystals were showing him the true history of the galaxy. How many civilizations had risen and fallen. How many wars had been fought over pride and fear. How much beauty had been destroyed by those who thought that strength came from making others suffer. The ancients had watched it all. They had tried to guide younger races away from the path of destruction, but they could not force wisdom on those who chose violence. Instead, they had left gifts, like the crystals, for those species that proved themselves worthy of a better way. Humanity was being tested at this moment. The Phoenix had the power to annihilate the Vorthak fleet in seconds. The crystals could turn their ships to dust or trap them in time loops, or send them to the edge of the galaxy. But would humanity choose such terrible revenge? Captain Jiwan made her decision. She would not become the monster that the Vorthak expected her to be. The Phoenix would demonstrate its power, but in a way that preserved life rather than destroying it. The ancient way. The path of wisdom and mercy. The transformation was complete. The Phoenix now radiated power that could be felt across the solar system. Earth itself was bathed in the gentle energy of the crystals. Every human on the planet looked up at the stars and felt a moment of perfect peace. They knew that something wonderful was happening. Admiral Gorak realized that his empire stood at a crossroads. The humans possessed technology that could end the Vorthak in moments, yet they had not attacked. They had shown restraint when they could have shown destruction. What kind of enemy showed mercy when they held absolute power? The Phoenix hung in space like a small star surrounded by the massive Vorthak fleet. The contrast was striking. One small ship of beauty and light faced 3,000 dark vessels built for war and conquest. The galaxy itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Captain Jiwan opened her mind to the ancient wisdom and prepared to show the Vorthak that there was another way to live, a way that led not to emptiness and fear, but to growth and joy, and the kind of strength that came from protecting others rather than destroying them. Admiral Gorak watched his tactical screens as 50 of his finest warships moved to surround the strange human vessel. The ships were his pride. The best warriors in the Vorthak fleet commanded them. Each ship was the size of a human city and armed, with weapons that could melt continents their crews had never known defeat. The Phoenix looked tiny compared to the Vorthak destroyers, but its appearance had changed completely. The ship now seemed to be made of liquid starlight. Its hull shifted. Between silver and deep black energy patterns flowed across its surface like rivers of captured lightning. It was beautiful and terrifying at the same time. Captain Jiwan stood on her bridge, feeling the power of the ancients flowing through her. The crystal technology had bonded with every system on the ship. The Phoenix was no longer just a machine. It was alive in ways that human science could not explain. The ship responded to her thoughts and emotions like an extension of her own body. Ancient memories whispered to her about the choice she faced. She could destroy the Vorthak fleet instantly. The crystals contained weapons that could unmake matter itself or trap entire fleets in time loops. But the ancients had learned that such power corrupted those who used it without wisdom. Dr. Minho monitored the energy readings from his transformed laboratory. The crystals were ready to release power that could reshape solar systems, but they were waiting for Captain Jiwan's decision. The ancient technology would not act without conscious choice from its human partners. The lead Vorthak destroyer opened fire. First, massive plasma bolts that could vaporize mountains streaked toward the Phoenix. The energy beam struck an invisible barrier around the human ship and simply vanished. The attack was absorbed as if it had never existed. Engineer Tai Hyun reported something amazing. The Phoenix shields were not just blocking the attacks, they were converting the hostile energy into power for their own systems. Every shot the Vorthak fired was making the human ship stronger. The ancient technology turned violence into strength. More Vorthak ships opened fire. Hundreds of plasma beams and missile swarms targeted the Phoenix. The barrage was enough to destroy entire planets. But the human ship sat calmly in the storm of destruction. Its barrier absorbed every attack and grew brighter with each impact. Admiral Gorak could not believe what he was seeing. His most powerful weapons were useless against the human ship. His sensors showed that the Phoenix was actually gaining energy from being attacked. It was impossible according to everything the Vorthak knew about warfare. Captain Jiwan felt the moment arrive. The time for demonstration had come. She would show the Vorthak the power they faced, but she would do it in a way that preserved life. The ancient wisdom guided her choice. Violence would be met with a lesson, not with more violence. The Phoenix focused its power on one of the attacking Vorthak destroyers. The massive warship suddenly began to change. Time started moving faster around it. The proud vessel that had terrorized countless worlds began to age rapidly. Its hull corroded, its weapons failed, and its systems shut down one by one. The Vorthak crew watched in horror as their mighty ship crumbled around them. Metal turned to rust. Energy conduits failed. Computers died. But something impossible was happening at the same time. The crew members were not aging. They were being carefully protected by the Phoenix even as their ship was destroyed. Within seconds, the Vorthak destroyer had aged 1,000 years. Its hull fell apart like sand. The ship that had been the pride of the fleet became cosmic dust, but every single crew member found themselves safely transported to a nearby world. Their lives preserved even as their weapon of war was unmade. Captain Jiwan expanded the demonstration. The time acceleration field spread to the other attacking ships. 50 proud Vorthak warships began to age and crumble. Their crews watched their vessels fall apart, but felt the gentle touch of the Phoenix protecting them from harm. One by one, the attacking ships turned to dust. Their weapon systems failed, their hulls collapsed, and their engines went dark. But not a single life was lost. The Phoenix carefully moved each crew member to safety before their ship was destroyed. The human vessel had the power to kill, but chose to preserve life instead. Admiral Gorak stared at the empty space where his attack force had been moments before. 50 of his best ships were gone, reduced to floating debris. But his warriors were alive. The human ship had somehow saved them, even while destroying their vessels. Such mercy was beyond Vorthak understanding. The Phoenix sent a message to the Vorthak fleet. Captain Jiwan's voice carried across space, translated by the ancient technology. Her words were simple and clear. Earth offered peace to those who chose to. Abandon conquest. Humanity would share their newfound knowledge with any who renounced violence. The demonstration had achieved its purpose. The Vorthak fleet now understood the terrible power they faced. One small human ship could destroy their entire armada ship by ship. Yet the humans chose mercy over massacre. They offered wisdom instead of revenge. Admiral Gorak felt something breaking inside him. He had spent centuries believing that only the strong deserved to survive. His empire was built on the idea that mercy was weakness, Yet here was a species that showed mercy from a position of absolute strength. The surviving Vorthak captains called for orders. Their ships could still fight. But what was the point? Their most powerful weapons were useless against the Phoenix. The human ship could destroy them all without effort. Yet it chose not to. Such restraint was more frightening than any weapon. Captain Jiwan waited for the Vorthak response. The ancient technology had shown them the consequences of choosing violence over wisdom. Now it was time to see if the Vorthak could learn from the demonstration, or if they would continue down the path of destruction. Dr. Minho watched the energy readings as the Phoenix maintained its protective barriers. The ship was ready to defend Earth from any attack, but it was also ready to teach any who wanted to learn. The crystals contained knowledge that could transform the galaxy if used wisely. Communications officer Hyunwoo detected signals from throughout the Vorthak fleet. The alien commanders were talking among themselves. Some wanted to continue the attack. Others were questioning everything they had believed about strength and weakness. The moment stretched on. The Phoenix hung in space like a bright star surrounded by thousands of dark warships. The entire galaxy seemed to be watching, waiting to see if the Vorthak Empire would choose wisdom or if they would force humanity to demonstrate even more terrible power. Admiral Gorak knew that his next decision would determine the fate of his people. The humans had shown that they could destroy the Vorthak, but they had also shown that they preferred to preserve life. Such an enemy was unlike anything in his experience. Captain Jiwan felt the weight of countless futures pressing down on her. The ancient memories showed her what could happen if the Vorthak chose war. Entire star systems would burn, civilizations would fall, and the galaxy would be bathed in sorrow. But there was another path if the Vorthak could find the courage to take it. The Phoenix waited patient as starlight. Its crystal heart pulsed with ancient wisdom. Its human crew stood ready to defend their world or to welcome new friends. The choice belonged to Admiral Gorak and his fleet. The future of the galaxy hung in the balance. Hours passed in silence. The Vorthak Armada held its position while Admiral Gorak struggled with a decision that would change everything. His bridge crew waited for orders, but their commander stared at the small human ship that had just demonstrated impossible power. 3,000 Vorthak warships surrounded one tiny vessel, yet everyone knew who held the real advantage. Admiral Gorak had never faced an enemy like this. In 300 years of conquest, he had learned to respect only strength and firepower. The weak begged for mercy, and the strong took what they wanted, but the humans had shown mercy from a position of overwhelming power. Such behavior went against everything he understood about the nature of war. Captain Jiwan opened communications to the Vorthak flagship. Her voice carried clearly across space as the Phoenix systems translated her words into the alien language. She spoke without anger or hatred. Her tone was calm and patient, like a teacher explaining a difficult lesson to confused students. She told Admiral Gorak that humanity did not seek revenge or conquest. Earth wanted only the right to exist in peace among the stars. The ancient technology had chosen humans not because they were the strongest, but because they understood that true power meant protecting those who could not protect themselves. The Phoenix shared images with the Vorthak fleet, showing them the history of their own species. Captain Jiwan had learned this knowledge from the ancient crystals. The Vorthak had not always been conquerors. Once they had been peaceful explorers who traveled the galaxy to learn and discover new wonders. Long ago, the Vorthak had encountered another aggressive species that tried to destroy them. The war had lasted for centuries and changed the Vorthak forever. They became warriors to survive but forgot how to be anything else. When their enemy was finally defeated, the Vorthak continued fighting because war was all they knew. Captain Jiwan showed Admiral Gorak what his people had lost. They had once been artists and scientists and philosophers. They had built beautiful cities and created amazing technologies, but the endless wars had stripped away everything that made them more than just killing machines. Izar, ancient memories revealed the truth about the Vorthak Empire. It was hollow inside. The conquered worlds provided resources but no joy. The victories brought territory, but no satisfaction. The Vorthak had become prisoners of their own success, trapped In a cycle of violence that could never end, Admiral Gorak felt something stirring in his heart that he had not experienced in centuries. Shame. He looked at his reflection in the dark viewports and saw not a proud warrior, but a tired old killer who had forgotten why he started fighting. The humans were offering him a chance to remember who his people used to be. Dr. Minho worked to establish a deeper connection between the Phoenix and the Vorthak fleet. The ancient crystals contained technology that could link minds across species barriers. As the connection strengthened, both sides began to experience each other's thoughts and feelings. Human crew members felt the Vorthak fear. The alien warriors were terrified of appearing weak. They had been taught from birth that mercy was failure and that only the strong deserved to live. But underneath that programming was a deep longing for peace and the joy they had lost. The Vorthak warriors experienced human emotions for the first time. They felt the desperate love that drove humans to defend their world. They experienced the grief of parents who might never see their children grow up. They understood the courage it took to face impossible odds for the sake of others. Navigator Yunji reported that something was happening throughout the Vorthak fleet. Individual ship commanders were breaking formation. Some were moving closer to the Phoenix while others were pulling back. The alien fleet was dividing as different commanders made different choices. Some Vorthak captains could not accept what they had witnessed. They refused to believe that their empire was wrong. They prepared their ships for a final attack, even knowing it was hopeless. Their pride would not let them admit that there was another way to live, but other Vorthak commanders were experiencing something like awakening. They remembered stories their grandparents had told them about the old days when their people explored the stars for knowledge rather than conquest. They wondered what their civilization might have become without the endless wars. Admiral Gorak made the hardest decision of his long life. He opened a channel to his entire fleet and spoke words that would echo across the galaxy. His voice carried the weight of centuries as he formally surrendered his armada to the small human ship that had shown them a better way. The Admiral requested permission to learn from humanity's example. He asked Captain Jiwan to teach the Vorthak how to live without conquest, how to find strength in protecting others rather than destroying them. It was a request that no Vorthak commander had ever made before. Captain Jiwan accepted the surrender with grace. She offered to share the ancient knowledge freely with any species that chose cooperation over conquest. The crystals contained technologies that could solve energy problems, cure diseases, and explore the galaxy without the need for warfare. Not all Vorthak ships accepted their admiral's decision. About a third of the fleet broke away and fled into deep space. Their commanders could not abandon the old ways. They would rather face exile than admit that their entire worldview was wrong. But the majority of the Vorthak fleet remained. They powered down their weapons as a sign of good faith. Their crews waited nervously to see what would happen next. They had surrendered to an enemy that had shown impossible mercy, but they did not know what that mercy would cost them. The Phoenix began sharing ancient knowledge with the Vorthak ships that had chosen peace. Technological blueprints flowed from the crystals into alien computer systems. Weapon designs were replaced with plans for hospitals and schools and art galleries. Vorthak engineers worked alongside human scientists as the true purpose of the ancient legacy became clear. The crystals were not just weapons or tools. They were seeds of wisdom planted by beings who had transcended the need for physical existence. Captain Jiwan watched former enemies working together with wonder in her heart. The ancients had waited millions of years for this moment, when two species would choose cooperation over destruction. The galaxy was taking its first steps toward a future built on wisdom rather than fear. Admiral Gorak stood alone on his bridge looking at the stars with new eyes. He had spent his life bringing death to countless worlds, but now he had the chance to bring life instead. The humans had shown him that redemption was possible even for someone who had made as many mistakes as he had. The Phoenix continued to glow with ancient power, but now that light was shared with the Vorthak fleet. Hundreds of ships that had once been instruments of conquest began transforming into tools of exploration and healing. The galaxy was about to discover what peace could accomplish. Dr. Minho smiled as he watched the energy readings from his crystal laboratory. The ancient technology was fulfilling its true purpose at last. It was not meant to destroy but to unite different species under the banner of wisdom and compassion. The real victory was just beginning. The surrender of Admiral Gorak sent shockwaves across the galaxy. News of the impossible victory spread through hyperspace communications faster than anyone had expected. A small human ship had faced the mighty Vorthak Empire and won without firing a shot. The story seemed too incredible to believe, but the evidence was impossible to deny. Captain Jiwan stood in the meeting chamber of her transformed ship representatives. From both fleets gathered around a table made of crystal that glowed with soft ancient light. Human officers sat beside Vorthak commanders who had removed their weapons as a sign of trust. The enemies of yesterday were becoming the allies of tomorrow. Admiral Gorak looked different without his battle armor. He was still, tall and imposing, but there was something gentle in his red eyes that had not been there before. The weight of 3 centuries of conquest seemed to have lifted from his shoulders. He spoke slowly and carefully, as if learning a new language. The admiral formally requested that the Vorthak Empire be dissolved. Their military might would be transformed into an exploration and aid organization. The vast fleets that had terrorized the galaxy would become vessels of mercy carrying medical supplies and terraforming equipment to worlds damaged by previous conflicts. Dr. Minho worked with Vorthak scientists to understand their technology. The aliens had developed amazing engineering during their centuries of war, but they had focused only on destruction. Now that knowledge could be turned toward creation. Vorthak shipyards began producing research vessels and hospital ships instead of weapons of war. The Phoenix shared its ancient knowledge freely, broadcasting technological secrets to any ship that requested them. The crystals contained the wisdom of millions of years. Formulas for clean energy medical treatments that could cure any disease and transportation methods that could cross the galaxy in days. Instead of years, Engineer Taihyun marveled at how quickly the Vorthak adapted to their new purpose. Warriors who had spent their lives perfecting the art of destruction threw themselves into learning how to build and heal. Their military discipline served them well as they retrained for peaceful missions. The news reached Earth within hours. President Hayes could barely comprehend the reports coming from the defense fleet. Not only had the alien invasion been stopped, but the invaders had become allies. The impossible had happened, and humanity was suddenly the center of a galactic alliance. Captain G1 received messages from dozens of species across the galaxy. Civilizations that had hidden in fear of the Vorthak Empire were emerging from their shells. Worlds that had been conquered were declaring their independence. The galaxy was transforming as word of the peaceful revolution spread. Some Vorthak commanders had fled rather than accept the new order. They took their ships to the outer rim of the galaxy where they tried to continue the old ways of conquest. But without the support of the main empire, their efforts were doomed to failure. Most would eventually return, seeking forgiveness and redemption. Dr. Minho established the first interspecies academy on a neutral world between Earth and the former Vorthak territory. Beings from across the galaxy came to study ancient technology and philosophy together. The crystals revealed that similar caches existed on dozens of worlds waiting for species mature, enough to use them responsibly. The academy became a place where former enemies learned to work together. Humans shared their creativity and compassion, while the Vorthak contributed their discipline and engineering skills. Other species brought their own gifts, creating a fusion of knowledge that surpassed anything. The galaxy had seen Navigator Yunji led the first joint exploration mission. Human and Vorthak ships traveled together to investigate one of the ancient cache sites. They found ruins of incredible beauty and technology that made their current achievements seem primitive. The ancients had left guidebooks for the development of galactic civilization. The exploration revealed that the galaxy had gone through cycles of war and peace. For millions of years, young species would develop space travel, discover other races, and either learn to cooperate or destroy each other. The ancients had been the first to break the cycle and evolve beyond the need for conflict. Captain Jiwan realized that humanity had been given an incredible responsibility. They were now the guardians of ancient wisdom, tasked with helping other species make the same choice between destruction and cooperation. The crystals had chosen humans, not because they were perfect, but because they had the potential to grow. Admiral Gorak threw himself into his new role with the same intensity he had once brought to conquest. He personally led relief missions to worlds his forces had damaged. He worked tirelessly to undo the harm the Vorthak Empire had caused. His redemption became an example for his entire species. The transformation was not easy. Some humans wanted revenge for the threat Earth had faced. Some Vorthak could not accept that their entire culture had been wrong. But the ancient technology helped both species overcome their prejudices by sharing emotions and memories. Directly communications. Officer Hyunwoo established a galaxy-wide communication network that allowed instant translation between any species. The language barriers that had caused so many conflicts were eliminated overnight. Understanding replaced fear as the foundation of interspecies relations. The Phoenix became a symbol of hope for the entire galaxy. The small ship that had faced impossible odds and chosen mercy over vengeance. Captain Jiwon found herself serving as an ambassador and teacher, helping other species discover their own potential for wisdom and growth. 1 year after the Great Confrontation, the galaxy looked completely different. The Vorthak war machine had become a force for healing and construction. Former slave worlds were rebuilding with advanced technology. Trade and cultural exchange flourished between species that had never spoken before. Minho smiled as he watched his students in the academy laboratory. Humans, Vorthak, and dozens of other species worked together on projects that would have been impossible alone. They were developing technologies that could terraform dead worlds, bring extinct species back to life, and even communicate across dimensional barriers. The ancient crystals continued to reveal new secrets as more species proved themselves worthy. Each discovery brought the galaxy closer together. The cycle of war and destruction that had repeated for eons was finally broken. Young civilizations now had guides to help them choose the path of wisdom. Captain Jiwon stood on the observation deck of the academy, watching ships from 100 different worlds dock. At the station, beings who had been enemies or strangers were now friends and colleagues working together to build a better future. The dream of the ancients was finally becoming reality. Admiral Gorak found peace at last in service to others. His warriors had become healers and builders. Their strength was now used to protect the weak rather than exploit them. The Vorthak discovered that there were victories more satisfying than conquest achievements that brought lasting joy instead of temporary dominance. The small blue planet called Earth had become the heart of a growing alliance dedicated to exploration, discovery, and mutual aid. The species that had once cowered before alien invasion fleets now served as teachers and guides. For the galaxy, Earth had chosen the path of the ancients, and in doing so had transformed the universe itself. The Phoenix still sailed among the stars, carrying ancient wisdom to new worlds. Its crew had aged, but their mission continued. New generations of humans and Vorthak served together, spreading the message that true strength came not from the power to destroy, but from the wisdom to choose mercy when destruction would be so much easier. The galaxy had learned the greatest lesson of all, that the cycle of violence could be broken, that enemies could become friends, that the universe was vast enough for everyone to find their place in peace. The ancients had transcended physical existence, but their legacy lived on in every act of kindness, every moment of cooperation, every choice to build rather than destroy. And in the depths of space, other ancient caches waited patiently for the next species, ready to learn that the greatest victories were won not through conquest, but through the courage to choose a better way.